This year has been a wild one. All the long road trips, plane journeys, and post-work downtime have made it one of my favourite years of reading so far, so I wanted to share today my favourite books of 2023. Starting off with Four Winds by Kristen Hanna. This story is set in America in the 1930s in Texas during the Great Depression. There are these horrible droughts and horrific massive dust storms which are taking over the land and affecting the lives of farmers who are out of work and out of money because of these weather conditions. And that includes the characters in this story. Elsa, the main character, is a fiercely protective but deeply insecure and troubled mother. She fell into motherhood quite unexpectedly and quite young. And after her own very troubled and loveless childhood with her parents, she throws herself into motherhood and loving and nurturing her son and daughter. Once these deathly weather conditions take over the family farm, Elsa has to make a really tough decision and go against all of the expectations riding on her shoulders to leave this farm and seek a better life in California for her children. The build up to her finally fleeing is so dark and desolate and desperate. I mean, the way they describe these dust storms coming and sweeping over the land and caking shut everyone's eyes and caking the inside of their throats and causing some really serious health conditions. It's honestly such a horrific time in history that I didn't really know about, and because of how awful it is, you really think it's going to get better once Elsa finally escapes with her children. But unfortunately, that is the beginning of all of the trials and tribulations that lay ahead for this family throughout this book. Although Elsa is escaping to try and save her children, there is a lot of resentment, especially from her daughter, who believes she's been torn away from her grandparents and her frankly good-for-nothing father, and so she really resents her mother. Elsa also constantly has that inner monologue from her toxic parents telling her she's not good enough or strong enough. So although she's made such a bold and brave decision, she is second-guessing and questioning herself all along. But Elsa's strength to carry on and fight for her children is absolutely unwavering throughout the story. The book takes quite a gradual but intentional turn into a political, socio-economic commentary on what is going on, and you watch Elsa grow into someone who's becoming braver, able to stand up for what she believes in. Such an amazing journey to go on with her, and at the end, I mean, I cried. It doesn't really bode for much when I say that I cried because it doesn't take much to set my tears off, but I vividly remember finishing this book off during a lunch break when I was locuming in Australia in ED, and I somehow managed to get lost into the story, block out all the beeps and noises of patients and staff going on in the background, and even in that clinical environment I just felt so deeply emotional, and it really took me a while to get my together and get back to work after that. My favourite quote was one from Elsa where she says, "Jack says I am a warrior, and while I don't believe it, I know this. A warrior believes in an end she can't see and fights for it. A warrior never gives up. A warrior fights for those weaker than herself. It sounds like motherhood to me." This book really opened my eyes into what it means to be a mother and the meaning of sacrifice in the name of protecting your children or giving them a better life or better opportunities than you had. I saw my mother in Elsa and my mother's mother, and these instinctive and almost tribal characteristics that they all share despite all being from different walks of life was so apparent. It was just such a great story of the American dream, or the lack of, the importance of community and motherhood, of course. I don't know if I was missing my own mum all the way out in Australia or if I was trapped in some mother literature algorithm, but the next book that came to me was called All My Mothers by Joanna Glenn. This book was slightly different in that it followed the point of view of the child, which was the young Eva Martinez Green. Eva is also the child of two very emotionally unavailable parents, and once Eva starts school, she really starts questioning her childhood and her parents and wondering why they aren't as loving or as present as the ones she sees of her friends, or in particular ones that she reads about in a book which is read out to her at school, all about different kinds of mothers and how they love their children. And this book becomes a real anchor for Eva throughout this whole book as she goes on a search for her own mother and motherly love. The book starts with explaining the meaning of a Portuguese word saudade, which translates to a yearning for happiness that is past, or a longing for something or someone you love. And that really sets the tone of the whole book, because throughout Eva has this deep yearning to find this motherly love. What I adored most about this story is that because it's told from Eva's point of view, you follow her as she grows up, and so the book changes in tone and vocabulary as she grows, so you really feel like you're on that journey with her. She starts off as this really innocent child with this enchanting outlook on life, and you just want to scoop her up and just tell her everything's going to be okay. And then you follow her as she grows up and matures and learns about the harsher truths about life and becomes a little bit more jaded and begins to romanticize her life less and less. On this journey, Eva comes into contact with several other mothers and other women figures in her life with whom she finds herself in moments of tenderness and guidance and comfort. And this whole theme of family not necessarily being related to you by blood is a really common thread that goes on throughout Eva's life and throughout this story. My favourite part of the book is actually when Eva starts digging into her roots and goes back to her hometown in Spain called Cordoba, and through her eyes you take in all the cobbled courtyards filled with flowers, the scents of the orange trees, the flamenco dancers, and it's such a sensory delight to read about. The experiences she has, the lessons she learns, and all the relationships she has with friends and partners and these other women she meets in her life are so relatable. My favourite quote from this book is, I think, one of Eva's friend's parents talking to her, saying, "But no matter how many days you have, it's never enough. Life is never enough for us. That's the great tragedy of being human." The book was gorgeous. I loved the characters, I loved the setting, and of course, I cried at the end.
Wow.
Next, we take quite a turn into the next book, which was A Fine Balance by Rohinton Mystery. This was one of my favourite books of 2023 by far. It was one of those stories which you are thinking about long after it's over and you're still wondering how the characters are long after you finish reading the last page. It is set in 1970s India, which, like a lot of Indian history, I'm ashamed to say I don't really know much about, but that's one of the biggest reasons I appreciated this book so much, because it's a historical fiction, as well as drawing you into the characters and the stories. There's also a lot of political and social and historical context given about this time in history. There are four main characters: Dina, a widow who is trying desperately to make ends meet in a really tough time; Ishvar and Om Prakash, who are two tailors living a simple life in a small village; and Manek, who is a student. These characters are living through the state of emergency, which, very similar to the Four Winds book, is a time of history that I learnt everything I know about from this book alone. The state of emergency was a period in India that lasted almost 2 years, between 1975 and 1977, where the Prime Minister at the time, Indira Gandhi, declared this state, effectively suspend all democratic election activity and extend her period of power. So it was a very controversial time. This period was truly awful for the most vulnerable in India. Those living in poverty were treated inhumanely, with horrific sterilization programs being implemented to control the population, and what little they had in possessions and shelter being destroyed. And you see the repression that these people experienced firsthand through the eyes of Om and Ishvar, the tailors. One of my favorite quotes in this book was, "Sometimes you have to use your failures as stepping stones to success. You have to maintain a fine balance between hope and despair." And that's really what this whole book hinges on, and what this title is all about, is that fine balance of the hope that these characters experience, but also the true despair that they are living through. Now, I know this is a heavy book which discusses heavy topics, but if I'm being honest, I would never pick up a history book to learn more about this historical period in time. But through this book, the writer draws you so effortlessly into the lives of these characters, who really are quite lovable. You start to care about them and feel like you actually know them. You laugh with them as they tease each other like friends do. And then the writer manages to juxtapose all these light times next to such horrific tragedies that are happening in the background. So it's just a really, not enjoyable, that doesn't seem like the right word, but a very engaging way to learn about this part of history through these fictional characters living in a non-fictional time. As an Indian born and brought up in the UK, you simultaneously feel so connected to the motherland, but also sometimes so distant and alienated from it as well. This book was such a familiar, warm hug at times when it's describing all the sensory overload that is India, with all the market sounds and the trains and the crowds of people and the smells and the foods, whilst emotionally wrecking you at the same time. It's actually a really long book, but I didn't even notice the pages turning because I just loved the characters so much. I just wanted to know what they were doing all the time. And yeah, I can't recommend this book enough. Okay, taking another U-turn into a book I actually have in the flesh. When I got back home and I wasn't traveling so much, I started wanting to read that is one of the best smells in the world. I don't understand why paper and books smell so... What was I saying? Oh yes, so next book is Lessons in Chemistry by Bonnie Garmus, and this became a bit of a cult classic on the internet. I think it was all over my Instagram and it basically sucked me in. The story follows Elizabeth Zott, a very smart and shrewd chemist who takes no crap, but unfortunately gets a lot of it in the male-dominated world that is science at the time. You can see why I was drawn into her character. This book was set in the 1960s, so you know, we're 40 plus years on. But I don't think humanity has restored balance yet, but whatever. Through a series of events, Elizabeth ends up not actually doing research in a lab, but becoming the host of a live cooking show shown on national television. And in true Elizabeth Zott fashion, she approaches it as a very serious scientific endeavour and showcases her love and joy of cooking through the lens of chemistry. The show is a hit, especially amongst the women in the audience, whom Elizabeth manages to empower through every episode. I will start by saying it's a very unique story. I've never read anything like it, and the characters are so vivid and unusual. This is probably the only book I would give 4 stars, not 5, out of my list today, because the whole "I'm not like other girls" trope was a little bit forced at times. And I have seen some similar criticism around where Elizabeth, although is a very smart and successful chemist, is also not the best socially and building relationships with people. And it would be nice to show that you can have it all. And, you know, if you are a certain kind of woman who's very accomplished and scientific, you can also have those warm, maybe more feminine characteristics as well. But overall, it was truly a really enjoyable read. I read it in like a couple of weeks. And yeah, there were just such wild characters. Like I mentioned, there was a dog who could read. There was a TV presenter who had absolutely no backbone and made for a very funny character. There was a young daughter who, despite being 4, went on a bit of a life mission by herself, which was quite interesting to follow as well. So never a dull moment and very entertaining with a healthy dose of feminism, which I really appreciated, so I would definitely recommend. Next, we have a non-fiction book which I have crawled out from under a rock to read because I am very late to the party, and that is Sapiens by Dr. Yuval Noah Harari. I'm actually so mad that I waited this long in life to read it because, oh my god, what an incredible piece of book. It's a very hard book to explain, but if you are anything like me and you're constantly questioning, why are we here? Who made this rule? What is happening? Then this book answers those questions in such a simplified but sophisticated and readable way. Dr. Harari has divided the history of humanity, and so this book, into 4 parts. The part 1, the cognitive revolution, part 2, the agricultural revolution, part 3, the unification of humankind, and part 4, the scientific revolution. I am a certified overthinker, years of experience, I'm good at what I do, but this book spiraled me into the next dimension. And one of my favorite examples is in this book, Dr. Harari brings up the concept of money, and he uses this example to essentially explain how the whole world, all the economies and societies that have been built through money are built on trust. Stick with me here. So imagine a scenario where a builder has just finished a huge project and been paid £1 million. He deposits £1 million into his bank. Then there is a baker who wants to open up a cafe, and it will cost £1 million to build this whole project. She goes to the bank and asks for £1 million loan. The bank gives her the £1 million because they have that from the cash the builder has recently deposited. She can then pay the same builder to build her a cafe, and he deposits this £1 million into his bank. So now he has £2 million, but in actual cash, this is still the same £1 million that is being passed between everyone. The rest of this money is all just built on this agreement of trust between the banks and its clients. At the time of writing this, Dr. Harari stated that the US banks are allowed to loan $10 for every dollar that actually exists, which means the majority of our money is not tangible, is not in cash, and is just built on this system of mutual understanding. One of my favourite quotes about this topic: "It sounds like a giant Ponzi scheme, doesn't it? But if it's fraud, the entire modern economy is fraud. The fact is, it's not a deception, but rather a tribute to the amazing abilities of the human imagination. What enables banks and the entire economy to survive and flourish is our trust in the future. The trust is the sole backing for most of the money in the world." And actually, if I had to sum up this whole book, it would be just this. It is what separates us humans, sapiens, from everything else that has existed or does exist or will exist on the planet, and that is our ability to have this level of imagination where we can think outside of what our current environment is and build societies, hierarchies, systems like money, where we can tell stories, we can form communities, we can gossip, we can build friendships, and we can develop complex ideas which we then share with each other. And this stuff, all of this stuff, is what makes humans humans and what has made us such a successful species. It's biological, it's historical, it's deeply philosophical, but somehow it also reads like just a very smart friend telling you some really cool stories, which is, I think, where the strength of this book lies, is that it's so easy to read. In fact, I actually listened to this book in audiobook form, and the guy who does the narration has just the best voice that feels like a friend just telling you some stories. Be warned though, listening to this as an audiobook did mean pausing it every 5 minutes to just process what I had just learnt. An absolute must read. I made the conscious effort to read more fiction this year, which is so funny because fiction is what I grew up loving to read. But as I got older, I started looking down on fiction and just feeling the pressure to be reading non-fiction and self-improvement books all the time. And I quickly fell out of love with reading completely. But looking at this list, it's crazy how much inspiration you can get from fictional characters and how much historical context you can take from fictional stories as well. Not that reading always has to be an educational experience that you learn something from, but the fact that learning can be a byproduct of a really enjoyable reading experience is really cool. If you like these summaries, check out this video where I gave some other recommendations of some more non-fiction books. Also follow my Instagram where I give little mini reviews from time to time. Thank you so much for watching. Hope you had a great Christmas and have a wonderful new year, and I'll see you next year. Bye!